Hi everyone, hope you're well. Welcome to the third in a series of 5 events I'm doing with Jen and Lea from Omnis Education. Welcome back, Jen and Lea. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
I'm fine, thanks. You okay?
We're good.
Yeah,
yes.
everything's good.
Good. So today we're talking about decolonising education, which seems to be a bit of a buzzword in education at the moment. And I have to confess that until fairly recently, I'd never heard the term, so I'm still learning. I'm assuming that I'm not alone in this, and there may be others out there who are wondering how to approach this topic with their kids and their students. I've heard the expression do the work quite a lot recently, and I feel personally I need a bit more information on what this work is that we all need to take responsibility for. So I'm hoping this session will be a kind of idiot's guide, and it'll give us some practical advice and the basics really. So in a nutshell, we're going to cover what is decolonising education, why is it important, and what can we as parents and educators do about it. Before we start, I just wondered if Jen and Lea, if you could just introduce yourselves briefly, just for those that haven't met you before, and maybe give a little bit of background as to what Omnis is, what that's all about.
Sure. Would you like to go first, Lea?
Sure. I am Lea Jovy-Ford. I am the co-founder and chief operating officer of Omnis Education with Jen. We started up in the pandemic, and we are essentially an online, we call ourselves an online school. That's only one part of what we do, but we have a way of producing and creating and delivering progressive education, which is founded upon self-directed learning to anyone, anywhere.
That's a great nutshell, Lea. Well done.
I'm
Jen. I'm the CEO. I work with Lea, obviously. We do a lot of talking about ways to reform education, to think differently about how people learn, and to support parents and also administrators of micro schools and learning centers and pods, they call them in the States, but small scale solutions, which seem to be on the rise, which we think is a great thing, to help them to learn together, create learning communities. Sometimes we support them with curriculum. Sometimes we support them with live events. There's a lot of things that Omnis Education offers. And I love what we're talking about today because everything that we do, we're founded firmly on a foundation of diversity, equity, belonging, and anti-racism. And all of our materials, all of our facilitators, everything we do is centered around this idea of decolonizing education. And, the thing when people ask, what is that? There are a lot of opinions about what that is. And I don't know how it is for you guys in the UK, but in the States and Canada, that can be a really polarizing term and people have really politicized it. But the essence of what decolonizing education means is that we tell all the stories. And we acknowledge the fact that to this point, some stories have been deemed more important and have been centered more greatly than others. And so what decolonizing education is at its root is just about telling everyone's stories, telling all of the sides of history, of literature, of geography, of whatever the thing may be.
Great, thank you. Lea, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
I'm sure we'll get into it more.
You have lots to add.
I think probably to say with Omnis Education, when we talk about being founded upon these sort of roots of diversity, equity, and belonging and anti-racism, many companies talk about it and very few actually do it. And it's something that we are deeply committed to. So one of our goals is to be 50% Black and brown people as a team, and we are. And when we talk about telling all of the stories, the key, particularly for education, is that you can't just tell one story. You can't just tell one side, because it doesn't give people a deep and rich and broad perspective and understanding of what may have happened. So one of the easiest ways that we often demonstrate this is we have a learning block that we can share, which is kind of one of our old resources. But very few people know that there used to be a Black Wall Street, or that there used to be a former village, Seneca Village, on Central Park. And it was inhabited by Black people, and it was basically razed to the ground and replaced by what we see now. most people don't know that. Most people haven't been told these stories. Most kids just know almost the white presenting history of Wall Street and Central Park and as it is today. But there are so many other sides to a story. It's like, when something happens, an event happens, and you get one perspective, but you can have 10 people see the same thing and tell you about the same event that happened, and all of those different stories and perspectives will be told in a different way. And what we've had, and particularly with the curriculum that we have, is just one side of that story. We haven't had the multitude of diverse perspectives that our children can learn about, and that certainly I didn't learn about.
So what can teachers, for example, do if say they're following the national curriculum? What can they do to change this? How can they unpick it? How can we get these other stories in there?
Well, one of the things that's difficult in a public school or a state school setting is that teachers often don't have a lot of say as individuals over their curriculum. Now, having been a teacher previously, one of the things that you can do is add outside resources, right? As time allows. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes additional planning, which teachers also don't have the resources always to do in terms of time or money. There's lots of reasons why this entrenched way of doing things has become the entrenched way of doing things. And there are lots of reasons why, as I often say, we can't have nice things. But I think, one simple resource, if people are like, okay, I want to do something immediately today, there's a website called Database of Award-Winning Children's Literature, DAWCL.org, I think. And on that website, you can search all kinds of award-winning, as the name says, children's literature, and you can search by country, you can search by history period, you can search by culture, you can search by lots of different things. And so you could search for books from different perspectives around a particular thing that is being taught. And so that's one way to do that. Another way to do that, and I think this kind of gets at the root of it, and we will get there as we talk about, how do we do this, but for individual teachers to commit to doing the internal work themselves, as white people, and the vast majority of the people with power in the school systems are still white people. If we're not doing that work for ourselves internally because we believe in it, because we see the value in it for ourselves as well as for everyone else, then you can put any sort of diversity sticker over whatever you're doing, but if you're not owning that internally, then I have some questions about whether or not you're actually committed to it, whether or not we're actually going to make progress. So one of the things that we encourage all of our folks to do is commit to anti-racism work for themselves, and get into an accountability group for that. And we have a couple of those in Omnis that are happening. But for me personally, that's been one of the things that has led to the most change in my ability to decolonize the curriculum, if you will, is to decolonize yourself first. So I think it's that kind of work has to start at home.
Shall we address the kind of why and the what's in it for me? Because I think that is often the hurdle for white people, which is why should
Absolutely.
I do? Why should we, when such a power imbalance exists, which it does, and actually white people are the ones who have the power, particularly white men. They are at the top of the tree, systemically and in all the ways. Why should they, in their eyes, give up some of that power? And why should white people effectively rebalance that imbalance? I know what my answer to that is.
Well, Jo, what would your answer to that be? Like when you think about that, for we as white people, what comes to mind? What's the value prop, do you think, for us?
I guess it's preventing inequalities in the future, isn't it? We have to start with ourselves, and it affects our own community and our own children. It has to start with us, doesn't it?
You've hit on the core answer, I think, which is community and its connection. And if you think where we are as a society and community today, I don't think we've probably ever been more polarized than we are now, in all kinds of different ways. And there are many ways that we are divided, and race is one of them, and that is systemic, and it has been that the case for centuries. And if we're looking at broadening perspectives, if we're looking at evening up the power imbalance, the benefit to everybody in that is a greater awareness of each other, greater connection, less divide, more community, more understanding, greater perspectives. We can you can connect with another person when you understand their perspectives and where they're coming from. If you don't understand that, the ability to connect is much more difficult. So if we are, at its heart, it is about connection and community. And I think that the challenge for anyone doing anti-racism work, and any Black and brown people and there are many people in this space doing that work, it is, we're kind of encouraging and empowering allyship and allies with white colleagues, is to answer that question, what's in it for me? What is the benefit to kind of evening up that imbalance? And if you can't articulate that, and when you can't articulate that, it makes it really difficult to encourage people to do the work, because it isn't easy. It's stressful, and it's embarrassing, and it's shameful, and it's hard for many people. It isn't just white people who are racist. Black and brown people are racist too, and nobody wants to admit that they are a racist, or that they are racist, or they don't want to identify as racist. And it's that kind of self-identification which people find really hard, and you can only invite change when that awareness and kind of acknowledgement comes.
Yeah.
Can you?
For me, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's very easy for a white person to say, "Oh, well, I'm not racist." But can you talk about the difference between not being racist and being anti-racist?
So I don't know I can't think of a white person that I know who is racist in the sense of, I'm going to go out and intentionally do something terrible today. We're not doing that. But we are so baked in a system that has given us privilege that we did not ask for or deserve. And that's not our fault. But what we do with that absolutely is our responsibility. And so, for me, learning to acknowledge that, of course, I'm racist, because I can't not be racist. As my friend Sharon says, it's the water, not the shark. We are all baked in this system. And as a white person, I benefit from that. Inherently, that's a racist thing. Acknowledging that is the first step to being able to then equalize that, make choices around the privilege that you have and what you do with it, so that either because we're doing one of two things. We're either actively preserving it, and if you're ignoring the situation, you're actively preserving and supporting white supremacy, ouch, or you're actively countering it. And if you're actively countering it, then as Lea said, that's daily work, that's daily practice, that's screwing it up, that's recalibrating and trying again, because we're so baked in it, we don't see it. And that's been one of the things that I have had to learn is a place of ignorance for me often, is that I can't see what I don't see. And so I rely on other people, and I'm in a couple of accountability relationships with other people to help me see those things, because I want to see them and I want to do better, because community, right? We all bemoan this division that we feel in society. Well, the reason that there's division there is that we don't understand each other. And one of the things we talk about a lot at Omnis is that the purpose of education is change. You want to make change in the world in some way, for yourself, for others, for your community. The first step in that is always understand more. Understand what's going on around you, understand the historical context, understand the voices, the players, the perspectives, because until you have some understanding, you can't design something better, which is the next stage and maybe what we're in right now. And until you've designed something better, you can't take action in a way that's going to get the kind of change that you want. It's a 3-step intentional process. And that's true whether or not you're trying to, find a new kind of green energy or eliminate systemic racism.
Yeah.
To answer your question, Jo, and just to elaborate on what Jen said, and she said it kind of in the middle there, which is there is a difference between not being racist and being actively anti-racist, and the difference is that almost activism. It's taking action.
Yeah.
It isn't just sitting there and doing nothing, saying, "But I'm not racist," or "I kind of see this," and it's taking daily action to work on yourself first and foremost, because that is the first and only place that you can start. And then when you get comfortable and confident in talking about it and in discussing it and in being able to see it in other people and see it around you and challenging it, then it is kind of taking it one step further and expanding out beyond yourself.
And as educators, that's important. I know a lot of the people that follow progressive education, they're people who are educators. They're in classrooms with kids who are asking hard questions, who are living all kinds of different lives. And if we cannot be comfortable discussing those things, fielding those questions, creating safe spaces for kids and adults to have those conversations, then we are in fact perpetuating the system as it exists, which is doing harm.
Do you think that people are afraid to address this topic and maybe avoid it, like not deliberately, but it's this fear of offending others and this fear of getting it wrong, making mistakes, and that therefore maybe it's easier just not to engage? And I think as a parent, it's difficult to know what to say to my kids. I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong thing, so it's easy to say nothing. And then
that's almost part and parcel of, you know, we as parents and adults want to try and get everything right all the time, and we don't. And if we're going to model to our kids how to learn and how learning actually works, then it is okay for us to make mistakes. And that's not just about, you know, the topics of racism, it's about the topics of anything. If we're going to learn and grow, we're going to have to make mistakes, we're going to have to get it wrong, we're going to have to model how we handle that to our kids. And, you know, the topic of racism and anti-racism is no different. And it's a difficult topic because it's part of it is about, I think that the thing that we have recognized when it comes to addressing it and talking about it is there's a self-identification aspect there, which is, if I'm racist, that must mean I'm a terrible person, because that's what we've been led to believe. That's the message that we've had, you know. And there's a difference between people who are consciously, intentionally offensive and doing harm, and people who are unconscious, unaware of the harm that they're doing. As soon as it becomes conscious, then there is a kind of responsibility to do something about that. And that being called racist, you know, isn't the worst thing in the world, and yet to some people it really is, because of what that means to them and what they've associated with that from their past and their background, and kind of, you know, the baggage that it comes with.
Well, people see it as a verb, a thing that you do, instead of an adjective, a descriptor of a particular moment, you know? And I think that coming to that difference in my own head, I would never intentionally do a racist act, but unintentionally, all the time, it happens.
It's unconscious.
Yeah.
And in terms of not making mistakes, like I even worry about the terminology. Like I can't keep up to date with what's the right thing to say, the wrong thing to say. So then it's easy to kind of shy away from it. So I heard the other day that BAME is no longer the right word. Is that right? We shouldn't be using that anymore. So is it BIPOC? Is that out?
We've settled, we intentionally describe people as black and brown.
Right.
Because that is what most of our team members would choose to self-identify as. So I choose to describe as a brown person, and the black people in our company choose to describe as black people. When you the issue that some people have with terms like BAME and BIPOC is that it lumps people together who aren't part of the same kind of cultural identity or cultural heritage, and it's like a quick and easy term that is kind of quick and easy to use, as opposed to actually identifying people as they would choose to identify.
I feel like it's a shortcut, you know, and as white people, we love shortcuts. And so, you know, it's easier to use a term like that than to put the emotional and mental effort into thinking about how to properly identify a person or ask them how they would like to be identified.
Sorry, go on.
We don't speak for, and I certainly don't speak for all brown people everywhere, and black people on our team don't speak for black people everywhere. So we choose to use black and brown people. Some people are still okay with using BIPOC. Some people are still okay with using BAME. It is probably best practice to ask people how they would choose to identify. In terms of the kind of where most people are in terms of that progressive, how do we talk about this? BAME is less correct, if you want to go along the scale of kind of correct and not correct, than black or brown.
Okay. And I think, look, you know, in working with kids, just introducing that, you know, we've been, I can't speak for the UK because I didn't grow up there, but I know in the States and Canada, people have been afraid to identify people as black and brown. You'll hear people say, oh, well, I don't see color. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course we do. You know? And so asking people how they identify, and then, you know, doing the work to make sure that we're honoring that, that additional labor helps us grow.
Yes, I think that's an old message, isn't it? Like when I was growing up in school, I remember it was like color wasn't a thing. Everyone was meant to be, let's just treat everyone the same. Everyone's the same. Just ignore it and don't even say the word black. And so I don't know, it's become like a thing to avoid or be scared of.
What that does when you say I don't see color is that it basically kind of doesn't acknowledge the fact, the systemic racism, the fact that there are many systems set up to inherently provide privilege and different treatment, unequal treatment to white people and not black or brown people. And there are many examples of kind of how systemic racism plays out for individuals based upon their skin color. And when you say we don't see color, that's easy for a white person to say who experiences and gets all of the privilege of being white. But it's less easy for a black or a brown person to say when they are the ones experiencing the kind of the harmful behavior or the different treatment.
Yes, and it's perpetuating the idea that difference is bad, and actually difference is fine and should be celebrated.
Well, and you know, and race, like gender, is actually a social construct, really. Fundamentally, it's a way that we as humans and as a society have chosen to identify and probably express differences and distinction. And within that, you know, a system of privilege has developed based upon what is effectively an arbitrary measure that has been decided and determined by a group of people somewhere.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I can see some comments. Someone saying this is so helpful. People clapping. So thank you. That's really cool. I've got a delay. I can hear my own voice. That's really off-putting. God. So, yeah, you mentioned that Omnis has this commitment to decolonising education from the inside out. Can you tell us what this means in practice? In a day.
Lea uses the words deceptively simple when talking about our resources, because our online learning resources do look deceptively simple, but what goes into them is the secret sauce, is the important part. And this is where diversity, equity, belonging, and anti-racism, as well as lots of other kinds of diversity, are baked into our process. And so when we're choosing resources, we're actively curating to reflect global diversity. And that includes Black and Brown people, but that also includes LGBTQ voices, neurodiversity, other perspectives. Like we actively look for how to do that. And you asked earlier, what's a thing teachers can do? Well, one thing you can do when you're looking at your curriculum and you're told you're going to teach this thing is to just ask yourself, are there other voices that I could and should be including here? Because the answer to that is almost always yes. And if so, going and looking for those. And that's one of the key things that we do, is that we actively go looking for voices that are not obvious, that have been marginalized, that have been hidden even perhaps, and surface those perspectives as well, so that the conversation is a richer and broader one. And that's where the value is. When Lea was saying, what's in it for white people? Well, what's in it for us, of course, is broader community learning to think better and bigger by including all of these other voices. And we have to do that intentionally, because the system is set up to silence many.
We also start kind of, even before we get to the looking for the resources, we start from a kind of framing and narrative perspective, which is to present as much as we can what is. And we aren't naive enough to think we don't have filters, but the goal is always, how can we remove as many filters as possible, because we all have them, to say, here's what is. We're not going to say what is bad, what is good, what is right, or what is wrong. These are the stories that exist. And we have review teams who look specifically for this. If we feel that we have presented stories and they are all told by white people, or we have a whole raft of YouTube videos which are all presented by or created by white people, we will actively and consciously go looking for other perspectives from Black or brown people, or disabled people, or neurodivergent people, or all of the different perspectives that can provide a different lens on a particular event. Because if we all understand more from other people's perspectives, we can achieve greater connection. There isn't the polarity, there isn't the divisiveness.
Great, thank you. Do you have any more resources you can share so if people want to go out looking for these other resources, where can people go?
Well, any classroom teacher can use our resources. I know that sounds incredibly self-promoting, but there it is. If you want to use our resources in your classroom, no problem. Contact us. We'll help you do that. And we've got some schools that are testing aspects of that, specifically in the social emotional learning space right now. So that's one thing. The got that one wrong. The Anti-Racism Club for Adults that exists within Omnis Allies is spearheaded by Sharon Hurley Hall, who is our team lead for diversity, equity, and belonging. I've belonged to that group as a paying member for a year and a half now, and I say regularly that it's the best hour of my own personal education every month. And I firmly believe that every educator, whether that's a parent or a teacher or a learning center facilitator or any adult who is concerned with education of children or interacts with children, and also education with it in the adult community too, should be involved in a group like that. So if you'd like to participate in that, I highly recommend it. And it's a safe, supportive, encouraging, and yet accountability focused group that will move you forward in your process. And, you know, like Lea has said, I have said, I really think that it has to start with the individual. Yeah.
We are building, so we have Omnis School, but we also have something called Omnis Allies, which is the latest thing that we're building. And that is specifically the kind of the goal of that project is to dismantle discrimination of all kinds. And we have, if people don't know, we base what we kind of call our curriculum on essential questions. And the essential questions that we are tackling for Omnis Allies is: what is discrimination? Why is racism the hardest form of discrimination to dismantle? And how do we achieve equality? So they're big picture questions, and we will be creating learning resources, which are like our learning maps, where people can click around, and we will have intentionally and consciously curated and created a whole raft of resources around discrimination and what we can do about it, and to give people that perspective and those diverse perspectives of what is this? How do we tackle it? Kind of where has it come from? How do we stand a chance of getting rid of it? And that is going to be an entirely kind of separate resource that we're currently creating at the moment.
And that'll be useful in schools as well as corporations and other places.
Someone's just asking, could you post the link to the group or say the name again? So yeah, we'll just post all the resources in the comments.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd be so happy to do that.
Actually, Jen, you mentioned 2 weeks ago in our last session, 3 people that you recommended following that deal with this subject. So there was Akila Richards. I can't remember the names of the other 2. Who were the other 2?
Akila Richards, her most recent book is Raising Free People. I think that's also the name of her website. She's amazing. The other one was Malika Diggs. Her website is eclecticlearningnetwork.org or .com. I'm not 100% sure, but I will look that up and we'll post that also. And the third one is a woman named Camille, who's on Instagram. Her handle is the Intuitive Homeschooler, and she's great. She's just, the things she posts are hilariously fun and also spot on. And yeah, she's great. So I would recommend those 3 people to follow, 3 women, as good places to start if you're looking for some other voices in education that might be different from the ones that are showing up through the algorithm in your feed. Because that's the other thing. Some of these things are hard to find. You know, the algorithms suppress actively people who post about anti-racism. They suppress actively the Black and brown voices. They suppress actively women. So if you are intersectional in any of those things, it's so hard to get your stuff seen. So it's important to share those with each other in networks. That might be a fun thing for you to add to one of your pages, Jo.
Yeah. Is that a fact? So how does that work then? What you mean, the algorithms?
Yes, it's a fact.
Yes, it's a fact. We have various people who've tested it in various different ways, but their posts, particularly around anything to do with racism, just don't show up. They don't get any views. They don't get any shares. They don't show in people's feeds.
Oh, wow.
So there are various things. We can share some of the resources. Sharon, who's our diversity team lead, has created a ton of, she's got a really, really great anti-racism newsletter, which
yes, she does.
I recommend you anyone sign up to. But she's written something specifically about how to kind of get around the algorithms when you're talking about these topics, because it's as simple as sometimes putting like a full stop in the word racism so that the algorithms don't recognize that you're talking about racism, particularly on LinkedIn, where they continually suppress any kind of content that is even touches on racism.
Oh, wow.
Isn't the word for that shadow banning, Lea? If people want to research it more, it's called shadow banning.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, these are just some kind of systemic ways that it makes it really difficult to even have these conversations and to talk about these topics when you have the big platforms who actively try and discourage that from happening.
But why would they discourage it?
Systemic racism.
preserving the status quo. Why would they discourage it? That's a question that I bang my head against all the time now, because at the point that I am in my evolution of thinking, like, who could possibly argue with the idea of telling all the stories? Like, that's the best idea ever, right? Of course we want to include everyone. Of course we want to tell all the stories. And yet there are active discouragements of that all around us all the time.
If you want to really understand why, you have to go back to why, to understand why racism became a thing in the first place, and that is, you know, looking back at kind of the colonialist past and where that came from and why that happened, and you know, and that also delves into the psychology of people. You know, there are some very deep seated, most of the time, my personal opinion is that it comes from fear. You know, and if you look at the psychology of where racism has potentially come from, it gives you some clues as to why some people do not want to get rid of it now.
And this is why decolonizing education is so vital, is because if we don't learn those things, if we don't get that understand more piece, it's really not possible to design better and take the appropriate kind of action. Like telling all the stories, teaching the hard things is absolutely vital to the process of improving this. And that's why decolonizing education is such an important thing right now, why it's a buzzword, why it's also been so politicized and is often a contentious issue, because there are people with, you know, with agendas to protect. And
you know, think for yourself, do the research, do the reading, go and, you know, go and look at and answer the question, why is racism a thing? Where did it come from? Like deeply, where did it come from? Because if you can start to understand that, then you can start to unpick why it's such a thing still now and why it's going to be so hard to get rid of.
I'm really nervous about asking silly questions, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So you're talking about how we tackle this, and it's in terms of telling all the stories. So it's showing those role models for the Black and brown kids, so they can be aspirational. And how do we deal with, you know, all the unfairness of the past and the racism from the past? Like when I started looking at this with my children a year or so ago, it was after the George Floyd thing, and I started talking about, you know, slavery and all of this, and I worry that my sons have now taken the wrong message. So now, if we're out and about, my son might say something like, "Oh, there's a Black man. Oh, he's doing some job." Like, I don't know. I think there was something the other day, someone was collecting rubbish. He was like, "Oh, well, that's good that he's got a job, isn't it?" You know, as if I worry. And there was like an Asian doctor that we saw recently. It's like, "Oh, well, that's great, isn't it? They've done well." And I worry that it's actually planted that seed that wasn't there before. Like before, my kids didn't seem to be prejudiced. And, you know, a lot of this is unconscious. You don't know. But I worry I've now created this divide that wasn't there before.
But remember,
I handled this wrong.
Not at all. It's part of a journey, and the first part of that journey is recognizing and acknowledging and seeing what you didn't see before. So maybe they hadn't seen color, and maybe they hadn't noticed that people had different skin color, and maybe they hadn't noticed that people with different skin color have different opportunities and maybe different roles and different positions, and they're starting to see what they didn't see before. And it's part of a journey of, you know, you keep having those conversations and you keep moving them along the path, which is, well, let's talk about that. You know, that's a kind of either a bias, or it's an opinion, or it's a narrative that, you know, we've brought into because it's great that a Black person has a job. You know, well, where does that come from? Why is it great that a Black person has a job? What, you know, start digging into the questions and get curious about it, and you'll keep moving along the path. You know, no one has the answers. If it was an easy answer and it was an easy thing to do, it wouldn't still be an issue.
And better to be having the conversations than not having them, because what you pointed out is absolutely right. Those are biases, and they are there. Not talking about them doesn't make them not there. It just deep seats them a little more, you know. So your boys are definitely better off for having those conversations.
Yeah,
we have training at Omnis focused on unconscious bias training, and we've run it with our leadership team, and we've run it with our whole team, which is, we all have unconscious biases, and they remain unconscious unless we start to do the work to look at the biases that we might have and look at uncovering them and be continually aware of them and have them pointed out to us. And they can't become conscious unless we see them. But everybody has them, and kids don't know what they don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. And having those conversations is the only real way to surface things.
Yeah.
I think I've asked all my questions. Is there anything key that you'd like to say that you haven't said? Any more tips?
I'm just thinking about, the original question of sort of how do we, what is it? We've covered that well. Why is it important that we tackle this? We've covered that well. And what, sort of what are the next steps? And I think if people can move away from the political and the polarizing language around decolonizing education and just start to center in the conversations that are being had. Listen, this isn't threatening. This is telling all the stories. This is actually invitational. This is making our communities better and stronger by telling all of the stories, by including all of the voices. I think that's the perspective shift that sort of needs to happen for some of the adults talking around this, that it's not a threat. We're not trying to tear down anyone's statues or, take away anyone's history. No, what we're trying to do is make it all so much richer by telling all the stories. And to me, that's the narrative that we need to focus on as educators. And when we come up against people who push back, why would you be opposed to telling all of the stories? That's a very valid question to ask people, because there's not a good answer to that. Because the answer to that is, of course, we want to tell all the stories. Everyone can agree on that. But then in practice, it gets quite a bit messier because of the systemic nature of racism.
How do you think we can bring about change within the state system? How do we change this curriculum? Or is it about teachers having to do their own work themselves and getting around? I don't know.
That's a great question. I'm not sure how it works in the UK. I don't personally have a lot of optimism in the States and Canada about there being change fast enough or thoroughly enough to, the school systems in the States and Canada are just absolutely set up against evolution. And that's like a whole nother 3 hours of conversation. So I don't have a great deal of hope for the system in the short term in the States and Canada. I have a lot of hope for individual teachers and small schools, progressive schools, learning centers, those kinds of places where there's still community level power. Because I think that's the thing, right? It's building community, the thing that Lea pointed back to. And if we are as communities valuing these things, then they're going to be reflected in our education. And if they're not valued at the state level, it's going to be a lot harder to have them reflected.
Yeah, so it's about creating alternative models outside the system. Hopefully the system will be inspired by those.
Or pressured into it.
Yeah. Anything you'd like to add, Lea?
I think I'd probably urge people to continue to have the conversations. We have a specific session at Omnis, which is designed to hold a space for white people to just talk about this stuff and to practice saying the words in your mouth of, black people, brown people, have all of that, use the language, because you don't typically, I talk to my kids because they're half brown. I talk to them about being brown all the time. And, I have black colleagues and I use that language and I use those words all the time and I feel very comfortable doing it. But many white people don't. And so how it's difficult to have conversations with people, particularly if there's a possibility that they may come back and challenge you if you're not even comfortable using the words and using the language. So the more that people talk about it and can get comfortable using, even you asking kind of, is BAME the right term? Is BIPOC the right term? Do the work when it comes to using the language. Keep, even if you get it wrong, that's fine. Someone will challenge you. The other part that Jen is excellent at is when you are challenged, have a response, which is, gosh, I'm so sorry, I'll do better next time. That's it. There doesn't need to be
anything. That's not it, because the next part is putting yourself in a position where you learn to see the thing you didn't see. And if you need to, find accountability with somebody who can help you begin to see it. It's not enough to say, I'm so sorry, I'm not going to do it again. Well, it's your action plan for not doing it again.
because often the response that we get and we have seen with other people is defensiveness, and and so those words and even just that simple response is an acknowledgement that I might not have fully seen it. I've seen enough to know that clearly I've messed up. I've done something wrong. I haven't quite got it right. And there is no defensiveness. There's no kind of challenging. There's no, if a black or brown person tells you you have been racist, you have been racist. That's kind of our rule of thumb on this. And as a white person, generally, you don't ever get to determine and judge and say whether you have or you haven't been racist if a black or brown person has said that you have and you've done some harm to them, because they are the ones experiencing the harm in a way that you may not be able to even identify, because why would you be able to? You've never had it done to you. You know, it's a very different experience, and it's a lived experience of black and brown people. So the first step that makes it so much easier for black and brown people is when a white person holds up their hands and says, "I'm so sorry. You know, I might not see it. I'm going to do the work to see it, and I'll do better next time," as opposed to a whole load of excuses and defense. But I didn't mean it. There's another kind of, we talk about fault and responsibility. We also talk about intention and impact. And you may not ever intend to be offensive or harmful, but the impact of your words or your actions may cause harm. And to be able to just take responsibility for that and accountability and say, "I'm so sorry for the harm I've caused. I'll do better next time," is such a positive response for a black or a brown person to hear.
And the intention versus impact thing, I'm glad you said that, because if you hadn't, that's where I was going to go next. That's where the defensiveness comes from, because my response still is, "Oh my gosh, I didn't mean to," but you have to learn to save that explanation for later when the person is ready to hear, because most of the time the other person knows that you weren't intentionally being a jerk. You just naturally were in this case, right? That's where that defensiveness comes from, is we feel the need to defend our intention. Okay, well, great. Like, hopefully you have enough relationship with the person that they know that you weren't being intentionally horrible. But we have to hold space for the fact that we are responsible for our impacts in other people's lives, and people feel the way they feel, and that feeling is valid, and their experience in it is valid. And we're the ones often that have an unexamined bias or area that needs to be uncovered. And it's not fun. I don't ever enjoy that process, ever. It's demoralizing, because I work really hard at not doing them and doing them less often. The reality is that it's going to happen.
Can you recommend any books for children on this?
Ooh, I think we should probably have to ask Sharon, because I'm sure Sharon.
Yeah, you know what? I think we have a book list somewhere, Lea. I'm almost sure that we have a blog post from some time ago that was a list of books around anti-racism and around diversity, equity, and belonging for children. We will dig that up for you, Jo, because I do think that there are a number of good ones.
And even
for adults, can I make a recommendation for adults?
You can.
The Wake Up by Michelle Mijung Kim is wonderful. And we read that this winter in our anti-racism club. It was fantastic. Sharon went the extra, I was going to say the extra mile, but the extra like 10 miles to make sure that we could join with another book club to get to hear the author speak in person. It's a wonderful book. The thing that I loved the most about it was that it's invitational. You know, sometimes you read books about anti-racism, you walk away feeling like, oh, I've just realized what a terrible person I am, and how much, it feels heavy, right? This book, she doesn't shy away from the things that are heavy and hard, but her tone is like, come on, we can do this together. Everyone is going to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes, because if you're making mistakes, it means you're moving forward and you're trying. And there's a lot of very helpful information in there to get people past the I'm learning about a thing to I'm doing a thing. And that's where the rubber meets the road. We can talk a great game about diversity, equity, belonging, and anti-racism, but if we are not willing to actually take action daily in our lives, then we're not doing the thing.
True. Also on the book list, do you have any recommendations for like kids' fiction books that feature black and brown characters? Because that's a valid point, isn't it?
Linda has lots of storytime learning.
Yeah, our storytime club
often uses books with black and brown kids, so we can again probably get a list from her and share.
Yeah, Well, and also, that's another, you talk about things that you could do for your individual kids. Pop them into our Storytime Club, because they're going to get a weekly dose of books that center diversity and across a range of different ways of being in the world. And, that's really valuable too. And they'll meet with other kids who are talking about those kinds of things. So that's a way as a parent for you to expand the voices in your kid's life. Linda, who runs that, is spectacular at holding space for that and encouraging kids and creating community around diversity, equity, and belonging for children. For teens, a book that I loved, it's a teen fiction book, but I read it anyway years ago when it came out, is The Hate You Give. Excellent book. It was on a number of book lists for middle school and high schoolers, and then it was banned in a number of places, which is always a good sign to me. If you want to read something, look for the banned book list.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I guess that's the beauty of the online school, isn't it? That the kids are mixing with people from all different cultures, different colors. Yeah, they're living and breathing it all the time.
Yeah.
Yep. And we think the future of education is going to be hybrid. It doesn't mean that your local in-person learning experiences aren't valuable. Of course they are. But the limitation is that you're surrounded by a bunch of people like you, right? And it's really hard to increase beyond a certain bubble the diversity of voices if all you have access to is your local school. I was talking with Danny, who's one of the gals that works with us, the other day in our anti-racism chat that happens on Wednesdays. And she was saying where she lives, there just are not people who are not white. And so she's doing this work. She's really invested in it. But in terms of how do you take daily action? Well, for her, that has to happen in the online space, because there's just not an opportunity where she lives other than to challenge the white people around her, which she does.
Yeah. Great. Anything else to add finally before we wrap up?
Thanks for being brave, Jo. This is a scary one. Good job.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. It's I know it will have been really helpful for lots of people. So I'm putting myself out there, showing myself up. But you have to do that sometimes. Yeah, I really think it will have helped. So thank you. And we'll share all the resources afterwards.
Totally. And people are absolutely reach out if you have more questions, if you want support in this, if you see that there's a place that you need to do better and you're looking for resources, we will happily and freely share those, because this is so important. It's why we're building Omnis the way we are, but that's a drop in the bucket. Every single learning community, every single family needs to increase their commitment to this, and we're happy to help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Great. Right. Well, keep in touch. Thank you so much for being here. It's been amazing. And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time for the next one.
Yay.
Bye. For now. Bye.